kidding me. It's like, I don't want to see this.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Zach Fowler. I am one of the several co-leaders that we have here for the OWASP Omaha chapter. If you are new to OWASP, welcome. We love having you because it fills the room and it makes me feel cool that people show up. Want to thank the college, the Peter Institute, College of Information Science and Technology, for hosting us and providing the pizza. Yay! Thank you guys. If you're interested in their information insurance program, talk to me or some of the professors who are visiting here. I'm sure we can help you out. Let's see. So today we're going to talk about payment card security, and Rob Temple from Mutual is going to introduce himself, and, well, he's going to introduce his buddies here in a moment. But before we get started, when we start the chapter meetings, we thought we'd always open up with if anybody has any job openings that they'd like to share or pass around, or if you're looking for folks, or if you are looking for something. Anybody? Michael?
We're looking for more offensive security consultants at Solutionary. So if you know anybody who's talented in pen testing, you can jump right in.
Pen testing, offensive security at Solutionary. Okay.
Looking for an information security engineer at Gordman's.
Gordman's? Mm-hmm. Gordman's, like down the road here in Exarban? Oh, awesome. Did you guys walk over?
Yes.
Awesome. So security engineers over at Gordman's?
Yep. Assisting us with a wide variety of projects, compliance initiatives, incident response, penetration testing.
Sounds pretty exciting. Yeah?
PCI Worldwide is looking for a senior application development security.
So senior application developer for ACI Worldwide, and I'm repeating in case people... Application development security. Okay. ACI. Cool. Yes, sir.
Yeah, First State is looking for an information security officer. It's literally a jack of all trades, technical, business, everything. Got some in-depth tech skills. That's a huge plus, obviously. But
First Data, you said? Sorry?
Everything.
You say First Data?
First Data.
First Data. Scapegoat. Jack of all trades at First Data. Yeah.
So Mutual of Omaha's got an opening for a security analyst at job family. Mostly risk assessment. This is in the Arizona Tempe area, so it is subject to that. But if you know some friends or would be willing to move,
If you want to move to Tempe, Arizona,
there's some opportunity there.
can't be bad.
But yeah, risk assessment, compliance activities, incident response.
Awesome. Wow.
Now that business solutions, we don't have the posting yet, but we're looking for an application developer. It's going to be more the user of the security side as opposed to the consumer of the security side as opposed to actual security. So somebody's aware of this. We do a lot of PCI stuff.
Okay, and you said Nelnet?
Yep.
Super. Wow, that's so we got 28 people here and 7 different job opportunities. So I guess the market's pretty hot right now. So no problem. If you guys have openings, feel free to post them out to the OWASP Omaha mailing list. I think I have to approve you the first time you submit to the mailing list, but send it out there. We don't have a whole lot of activity on the mailing list right now, which is okay, but there's a whole lot more discussion that could happen out there on the mailing list or out in the other forums. Some people don't do social media. Mailing list is great because it goes to your inbox and you can filter it, or you can get the weekly digest. So feel free to join up, and if you search OWASP Omaha, and then, hey guys, join up on the wiki page. There's a link for the mailing list or our emails for myself, Michael, John, Fred, if you want to get in touch with us. With that, I'd like to introduce Rob Temple, one of our co-leaders from Mutual of Omaha. He's going to be spearing the talk today, and it's yours, Rob.
Quick question, will card deck be available?
I'm sorry?
Will card deck be
You bet. We'll post these out on the wiki, the OWASP official wiki thing afterwards, and then I'll also post a link to the video if you want to hear Rob talk again too.
Well, I'm going to be doing the intro, but I've got Joel vanBrandwijk. He's doing part of our talk, and Ryan Misek. I'll introduce both of those guys here in just a minute to you. But I also think it's good. I want you to meet our officers, our leadership team. Over here we've got John Rogers. He's our president. And then you've met Zach already out front there. And then Fred Donovan is also on our leadership team. All of these guys are part of the startup. So who else?
Michael in front.
And Michael. We got Michael Bourne right in front here. So Good to see you. You know, how many InfoSec organizations in Omaha advertise their pen testing jobs? I mean, this is great, isn't it? I mean, it's great to have so many. Obviously, the need is very in demand, and that's why we decided to go with the topic we did. We know PCI is a hot ticket. PCI 3.0 is a hot ticket right now. And as a former PCI QSA, you know, you always meet with the network teams, you meet with the firewall teams, but by the time you get to the developer team, you kind of get that deer in the headlights from the CISO and from the interviewers that you're working with. This is just one of those areas that seems to be just a little bit gray, a little bit nebulous. So we're gonna talk about that. Whether you're a developer, network professional, whether you're a student, your industry, government, it really doesn't matter. Chances are you're going to encounter the PCI world, and if you haven't already, most likely you will. How many of you, by the way, just show of hands, have engaged with the PCI audit or currently engaged with one or in the past have? So quite a few hands. How many of you really don't know what PCI is yet? Cool. Okay. This is great. We chances are that you're going to run into it, and so we're going to talk about it just a little bit. Just so I can just let you know, we've got Ryan Misek here. Ryan's a senior analyst with Mutual of Omaha's InfoSec team. He's got an extensive development background, and he's also got experience with PCI. He's going to be talking a little bit later about secure coding efforts. And then Joel vanBrandwijk is our Mutual of Omaha PCI ISA. He's the internal assessor. So both of those guys are going to help us with a lot of good information here in a second. But I wanted to just kind of set the stage, just briefly here. Okay, development teams, you know, developers have this mindset. We kind of think in terms of building blocks. You know, we conceive of ideas. We build ideas. We love to model. We love to design. I mean, that's kind of our thought process. You might say we're builders. We like to think of things as think it, build it. There are really no limits to that concept. I as a developer, you as a developer, we like to think in terms of what could we make with this set of building blocks that we've got. What could we do? We could do anything. We love to proof of concept. We love to try things out. In fact, the whole galaxy is an integration environment to us, right? There are no limits. The only limits we ever encounter are runtime environments. And by the way, yes, that is a Commodore 64. But our mindset is the development team, and for a second, I'm just going to come at it from a developer, because this is kind of the piece that fills in the requirement 6. As a developer, I'm a builder. I like to build things. You know, that's what I focus on. That's historically what developers have focused on. But as OWASP has done a great job of doing, they've kind of developed a vision of builders, breakers, and defenders. And gone are the days when we can just throw code out on the production server and hope it works. Gone are the days when we can just write something and not think about security. So we as developers have to have this mindset of breaker and defender as well. And OWASP does an awesome job of providing tools so that we as builders can be exposed to ways to defend and to break our own code. The game has changed. The builders need to be able to think like a breaker. As we're designing code, we need to be able to think like a breaker. We need to be able to think like a defender. And the big piece is sensitive data, credit card data. Bad guys want to steal the full credit card number, which is referred to as the PAN for many of you. the primary account number, the PAN. They want to steal that. They not only want to steal that, but they want to steal the magnetic stripe data, which includes the expiration date and the verification code. This is gold. This is great information for attackers. So this is what they're after. This is an e-shop. E-shops where you can actually buy credit cards online from anywhere from, it varies so much, but hundreds of dollars per credit card number. They actually have shopping carts where you can actually order them by the thousands if you want. So the need is out there for development teams to have a concept of secure coding, and PCI is just one framework that really requires that to be in place. So as we move forward here, I'm gonna turn this over to Joel. Joel is going to give us some information on an overview of PCI, and then Ryan's going to come in and talk a little bit about secure coding initiatives and how OWASP can be interwoven into the PCI Requirement 6. So I'm going to introduce Joel.
Thanks, Rob. So what I'm going to talk about today is primarily just the broad overview of PCI. When the changes happened, PCI changes on a 3-year cycle. So when the changes happened this last fall, I was the guy that kind of put my hand up and said, I think this is going to be a big deal. So then I was the guy that got to go to training and figure out how to fix this. So like I said, we'll just go over a kind of a broad overview, and then I'll show you kind of some of the common arguments and common sticking points too. But before that, I'll give you sort of an idea of what we're talking about as far as all these entities that interplay with credit card processing, just as some kind of a base knowledge. Okay. So in credit card processing, there are 4 basic entities. There's the merchant, which is just a store, the acquirer, who acts as a middleman between the banks and the merchant, the payment brand network, and there we're talking about Visa, Amex, MasterCard, JCB, and the issuer. And the issuer is going to be like your Wells Fargo or your Mutual of Omaha bank. So I have a Wells Fargo branded Visa. Visa is my payment brand. My issuer is Wells Fargo. In credit card processing, when I want to go buy something, I give my card to the merchant. The merchant receives that card and sends it to the acquirer to get approval. The acquirer then asks the payment brand who the issuer is and gets that approval by way of the payment brand from the issuer. The second one is, the second process is clearing. Clearing typically takes place within about 3 days of the transaction. So that first transaction, that's happening within a matter of seconds. Clearing is when basically it gets added to your statement, and the acquirer sends the purchase information to the payment brand. And then the final process is settlement. So this is at the end of the month when you see a payment, or you see your statement with the information on it, and you need to make that payment. And then the acquirer sends payment to the merchant. So the acquirer, again, acting as that middleman between 2 different parties there. Okay. So some background on PCI then. PCI is the data security standard, is a list of technical requirements. Basically, there are 12 high-level technical requirements that break down into around 350 specific requirements. So today I'm not going to try to go into in-depth each one of those 350 requirements because we would be here for another 48 hours. I don't know about you, but I got stuff to do. So this applies to merchants, issuers, and any other entities that store, process, and transmit. And those are really the kind of golden words here: store, process, and transmit cardholder data. So if you're storing it on a hard drive or you're processing it by viewing it on your monitor, either one of those would meet those qualifiers. The PCI DSS is put out by the PCI Standards Security Council. So this was initially founded by those payment brands, and it's since spun off into its own entity. They issue it, but they don't take any enforcement action. Enforcement action is taken by each of the individual payment brands. So if you have a PCI violation, but you process cards for all 4 payment brands, then you're looking at 4 different enforcement actions. And then PCI, since they come up with the standard, they also come up with the training for assessors. So I'm a PCI ISA, which is internal security assessor, which is actually exactly the same thing as a QSA, just a different test, or same test, different organization. If you have an ISA and you leave your company, you lose your ISA. You get to go test again. Whereas a QSA works for a QSA company, and if they move to a different QSA company, they keep their QSA. Some future developments that we're looking at with PCI is that it's on a 3-year cycle, right? So the next one will come out in 2017. What we're looking at there is, if you're involved at all in the compliance space, you know that the OCC has been real keen on vendor risk management. So we're going to see a lot more of that third-party risk management in PCI 4, and we're also going to see increased focus on virtualization. So with PCI 3, there was a consideration for putting stricter controls around the hypervisor layer, and that was eventually thrown out in the comments period, but we're looking at probably seeing that sometime soon. Okay. One of the really big challenges with PCI is determining scope. So there are sort of 2 levels of scope when you start talking about PCI. There's the cardholder data environment. The cardholder data environment is anything that stores, processes, or transmits a credit card. In-scope systems for PCI is anything that's on the same network segment as CDE, anything that's connected to, even if it's going through a firewall, CDE, anything that can impact the security of an in-scope system. So if I've got my database server over here, and I've got a management system back here, and the database server is storing CDE, and the management server is just connecting to it, and my domain controller over here is providing authentication to my management server, my domain controller is in scope. Authentication is a component of security. So when we look at how to reduce the burden of PCI, what we primarily look at is how can we reduce scope. So in this first picture on the your left, over here is we've got some CDE, we don't have any segmentation, we have a flat network, everything's in scope. The second one, we've put a firewall between our in-scope systems and everyone else, so only those systems are in CDE. And the third picture over here, we're actually using a pin pad which encrypts the card number on the device. You've seen these at like Target or Yonkers or that kind of thing. We don't actually have that encryption key, so we can't read that cardholder data. It goes off to the acquirer encrypted. Our entire environment goes out of scope. So I intended this to be kind of interactive. In the first picture, does anyone want to take a crack at what's in scope? We've got our vendor partner over here who has our credit card data. We've got a web redirection service that sends our users over to that vendor partner. We've got some LDAP here for authentication of that web redirection service, and then lastly a database, which isn't actually storing any cardholder data. Anybody? Okay. In this case, actually what we're looking at is the vendor partner is doing all the store, process, and transmit. So they're going to be CDE. Our web redirection service impacts the security of that transaction. This is a new thing with PCI 3. This is why it's a big deal to us. Previously, we've been using one of those web redirection services to offload our compliance. We don't have CDE. We don't have to worry about it. With a web redirection service, if I'm an attacker and I hit that web redirection service and I tell it instead of redirecting over to this vendor, why don't you go to my site and type in your credit card number there? That impacts the security of that transaction. This is a new thing, so that's in scope. And then the LDAP server impacts the security of that web redirection service. So that's going to be in scope also. The database server, yeah, it's connected, but it doesn't really impact the security of the transaction, so we'll leave that out. Okay? What about the second one, where we have our vendor partner web redirection service a call center user who's taking the card number over the phone, and then the rest of the picture looks pretty much the same. Any ideas on this one? What would change here?
The sensors also will be the scope.
Okay, yeah, that's true. The call center user, if they are typing the card number on their computer, they are processing and transmitting that card number. So that PC becomes in scope also. And then anything that impacts the security of that system or is connected to that system. So when you start thinking about that, if you're in a tightly integrated environment and you've got everybody's on the same email system, everybody's on the same file share system, all those shared systems and services become in scope if that call center user is in scope. This is why that pin pad thing I was talking about is really important. And in this last picture, we've got our database, our web server. We're storing credit card numbers in our database. We're typing them in our PC, and we're printing them off on our printer. So the emphasis of this one here is really that, yeah, it's paper, it's CDE, it's in scope. It doesn't matter if it's on a computer or if it's sitting on a tape drive or it's paper. It doesn't matter if it's an image file, a WAV file, anything like that. Okay? So then to jump into the requirements, I'm just going to give a real high level here. If you have any questions about any of these requirements, go ahead and stop me, raise your hand, because I'm going to kind of burn through these, otherwise it'll take way too long. The first requirement is to maintain a firewall. Essentially what this says is have a firewall at your boundary, have a firewall between PCI and non-PCI systems, so you're creating a DMZ there, and then manage the changes to that firewall. Use change management. Get approval for changes, test them. Okay. The second one, also with requirement 1, you do have to have a network diagram, which I'm sure we all have, up to date with services and ports on it. Documentation. So requirement 2 is, this is like the most awkwardly worded requirement in the entire thing. Do not use vendor passwords. Okay. And other security parameters. What does that mean? So this basically means having baselines for each type of system. You got a web server running Apache, have a web server for running Apache baseline. You got a MySQL database server and an Oracle database server, have a baseline for each one. They're looking for use only one function per server, document how you configured that function, and ensure that you keep that function in that way. Okay. Real quick here, we've got our PCI web server, and our administrator is connecting over port 23 to our PCI web server. The problems there would be we don't have a firewall between our non-PCI and PCI systems, and we're using an insecure service. Okay. On the bottom one, we're talking about how many baselines we would need. We've got firewall, web server, admin server, database server, and LDAP server. So it's 5 baselines for those 8 systems, 9 systems. Okay. Requirement 3 is the nastiest one in the entire set. Most of this other stuff is normal stuff that you should be doing. Requirement 3 is around encryption. So you can't store cardholder data unless it's masked, which means taking off all but the first 6, last 4, or encrypted. When you encrypt cardholder data, you need to use a separation of duties, dual control process, so you've got 2 people with 2 different keys. My manager gives me hell about this particular requirement whenever I mention it, because it sounds weird. But you need to encrypt data encrypting keys with key encrypting keys and store those keys in separate locations. And she looks at me like, what? So, if at all possible, really what the takeaway from requirement 3 is, if I don't have to store cardholder data, I don't want to. Requirement 4 then is around, we've got requirement 3, so it's data at rest. Requirement 4 is data being transmitted. Simple stuff, encrypt cardholder data when it's transmitted. Don't send it over email or IM. Really?
On requirement 3 there, do they have an encryption minimum?
Yes, yeah. So there are a set of algorithms, I don't know them off the top of my head. They're listed in the requirements. but basically it's going to be anything that, like SSL3, TLS 1.1, don't use TLS 1 or SSL2. And I know those aren't the algorithms, but the standards, the protocols themselves. Okay. So the first example here is that Tom and Joe are trying to encrypt some cardholder data, and they're simply outputting both of their keys and running this encryption program on it. Does that meet the intent of the requirement? And the answer here is no, because one person has the ability to execute both those processes, and the key length there is actually going to be 1024 times 2, right? You're just making a bigger key. Whereas if you encrypt it once with Tom's key, once with Joe's key, you get dual control, separated knowledge, and your key length is going to be 1024 times 1024 instead of doubled. So to your question, Global Corp uses satellite communications to send cardholder data from field offices to the data center. Which encryption method should they use? We've got SSL2, TLS1, TLS11, or no encryption is required because satellite links are inherently private. And D. Okay, everyone votes for. Oh no, we're not compliant. Okay. Requirement 5. This is another no-brainer. Use antivirus. Don't turn it off. Keep it up to date. Requirement 6. This is the one that's really important for us here today. So requirement 6 is around vulnerability management in third-party code, in your own code. Third-party code is pretty simple. Apply patches within 30 days. The your own code is more on incorporate security into the lifecycle. Have security in the design phase. Have security in the testing phase. Have security in the development phase. Ryan's going to get specifically into some of that stuff. There are 10 vulnerabilities. I think about 6 of those relate directly to the OWASP top 10. The others would be things like CWE top 25, where we're talking about buffer overflows. I think that's on the next slide, actually. And then anytime you implement a change into production, scan the application for vulnerabilities. And you have to do that at least quarterly anyways. Okay. Any questions on this one before I move on? Okay. Here's the 10. These are specifically called out in the PCI DSS. You must address these 10 things. I'm not going to dwell on this one because this is Ryan's, and I don't want to steal his thunder. And we'll move on from this one too. This is just picking out a bug in some code. So the next requirement is around access control. Actually, both of these kind of meld into one. So restrict cardholder data to a business need to know. Do I need to know credit card holder? Do I need to know cardholder data information? No, then don't give me access. Have deny by default and require documentation of all privilege changes. So if I want access to something, I need to send a request. That request needs to be approved, and we need to maintain that request somewhere. Requirement 8, the only real weird thing in here is that you need to, so this is basically, you need to have unique accounts for everybody. You need to manage those accounts, have secure passwords. The really weird thing in here is if you have vendors, only allow them access while they're doing a specific thing that you ask them to do, and monitor them while they do that thing. When I was in training, one of the ways that the instructor said that they dealt with this is actually having one of those RSA tokens for each vendor, right? And they gave those RSA tokens to the help desk. When the vendor needed access, they'd call in. The help desk person would read the RSA token to the vendor and then monitor everything they did while they were still logged in, log them off at the end of the section. So that's one way to get around that, having to have administrative overhead of enable the account, disable the account, that kind of thing. Okay, so new employees at Small Corp gain access to the credit card billing system by sending an email to the system administrator who adds the user. The process change there is we can't really use email for these kinds of things. We got to have actual business documentation. And then we don't have an approval in there. Nobody approved this access. Someone just asked for it and got System administrators typically log into the company database server using the root account over Telnet. They need the root privileges to do their job. What requirements are being violated? So this gets back to needing, what's that?
Is it using Telnet?
Using Telnet, that's one of them. Yeah, that's my bonus here. Like if you called that one out, you would get an extra slice of pizza.
Okay.
So the requirement 8 thing here is no shared accounts. So what I would recommend in this case, coming from a Linux background, a system administration background, is set up sudo. You're logging your stuff that way. If anybody does sudo -s, smack them on the head, and continue about your way. Okay. Number 9 is physical access to cardholder data. So this has basically 2 flavors. If you're using those pin pads, inspect them regularly, inventory them, make sure they aren't tampered with. And if you have a call center where you're actually typing in the information on CDE on a laptop or desktop, you need to have card-controlled access not only to the facility, but specifically to the area where those systems exist. So you have kind of a layered approach that way. Okay. Requirement 10 is to track and monitor all network resources for cardholder data. This is logging. Keep logs on things, not just on failures, but on successes as well. And then on this one, I asked why it's important to log security event successes. Can anyone tell me why it's important to log successes?
So you need to track who actually accesses the data.
Okay, that's one reason.
In case of some issues, you can.
That's one reason.
Because the auditors will ask for it.
That's another reason. So I only originally had 2 reasons, but that's a good one. Okay. Let's say I'm sitting at my log management system and I see 100,000 login failures and then nothing. What happened? They got in or they got bored.
Yeah.
One of the 2. I got to know which one, right? So that's why it's important to log a success. Okay. We're to the last 2 requirements here, so thank you guys for hanging in with this.
First, I was going to say, you should have failed to ban and banned them a long time ago.
What's that?
You should have failed to ban.
Sure.
And after so many attempts that failed, they should have just had their IP locked up.
Sure.
I have a server that 10 to 100 people from around the country, minimum, try to mark into every day.
Right, right.
And I'm sure, see if I paid more attention to more than that. Second content.
Yeah.
They don't get in something.
So have something in place to not allow 10,000 login attempts, but you know, let's say that I'm a really lucky guy and it takes me 3 attempts. I can tell you of cases in my penetration testing experience where it was the first thing we tried.
I use really long, secure passwords
So, yeah.
that are kept on password safe because I can't remember them myself. And I have to change them.
So yeah, then that's something that maybe you don't have to worry about. Yeah. So requirement 11, here's where we get to run vulnerability scanners over your systems on a regular basis meaning every quarter, or after significant changes. PCI loves this after significant changes, right? That's the way that you, that's the calm for people who are like really afraid to do that kind of thing. Significant changes basically means any change. If you're adding a new server, if you're turning on a new service, run a scan. Okay? And then you have to perform a pen test annually. That test needs to go from the inside out, from the outside in, and it needs to test your firewall for keeping that DMZ a DMZ. Okay? And then on this one we have an incident response plan, and this is a new requirement this year, have file system integrity monitoring. So something like tripwire or semantic endpoint protection that's going to watch and make sure that configuration files on the server don't get changed. Okay. Requirement 12 is all around security policy, so that's boring and we won't bother with it. The real key one here is third-party risk management. Have a process there. Okay. Let's skip over these two. So why bother? Target was PCI compliant, and they lost 40 million credit card numbers.
They also had a flag. Wait, how were they PCI compliant? They were allowing FTP out of their CD.
I'm glad that you guys are all up on this because we're going to get there. So let me rephrase that now. Target was assessed by a QSA company as being PCI compliant. So I'm a tier 3, I work for a tier 3 merchant. That means that tier 3 and tier 4 can perform their own internal assessments. I perform an assessment, and why would I even bother saying that we're compliant? Because Target said they were compliant. They still got hacked. Okay? So let's validate that statement. So how we think, and anybody who knows more details on this than I do, please feel free to chime in. Target granted an HVAC company named Fazio access to their network. Attackers compromised Fazio and used these systems as a pivot into Target. The HVAC network was not segmented from the point of sale network. Between November 15th and 28th, the attackers developed and tested malicious software on limited sections of Target's network. So they're like in there actually doing their development work on Target's network, which good for those guys.
Development and production, where it should be.
Yes. It's where it's going to be anyways, right? All right. So then on November 29th, on November 29th and 30th, they started their deployment activities, and this raised 5 critical alarms at Target's monitoring network. The further deployment took place within the next week after that and raised additional alarms. They were all ignored. And then attackers used FTP to exfiltrate data to servers in Russia and Israel. So where did we violate PCI there? Okay, so we had an attestation of compliance, but we were not meeting the spirit of compliance. Requirement 8, don't allow vendors access to your network unless you're monitoring them. Requirement 1, segment off your PCI stuff. Requirement 11, take follow-up action on critical alerts. And then requirements 1 and 2, the FTP protocol is allowed. Okay. So why bother? I mean, we don't take that many credit cards. What if we just ignore this? Like I said, I work for a tier 3 merchant. Okay. That means we do less than $100 million in credit card transactions a year. Why would we bother? It's going to be a big outlay to secure this stuff. Our acquirers require us to submit this attestation of compliance, right? We have a business relationship with a middleman. They require an attestation of compliance. If we don't submit it, they sever the business relationship. An attestation of compliance doesn't mean that I'm going and saying we're compliant. It means this is our level of compliance. Here are the areas that we're missing. So if I submit an attestation of compliance that has, we're missing this, this, and this, their response is going to be to create an action plan, correct these things. If I don't correct these things, then there are fines in place on a tiered structure. Visa and MasterCard used to publish their fine schedules. Visa took theirs down recently. MasterCard's, I believe, is still out there. It's $5,000 a month for the first 3 months, $10,000 a month for the next 3 months, $15,000 a month for the next 3 months, $20,000 a month for the next 3 months. That's one payment brand. That's $320,000. Multiply that by 4. That's what you could be looking at from a liability standpoint. So that's just non-compliance. If something bad happens, if we get breached because we weren't doing something, we will be found non-compliant. We'll be promoted from tier 3 to tier 1. That means that I can no longer do our attestation of compliance and audit. We have to hire somebody to do that. And that ranges in about $500,000 to have those done annually. In addition to paying back whatever fraud was committed, we then also have breach fines. And we lose trust to our customers, which is the most important reason why we should care. Okay. It seems really hard to do all this, but most of these requirements represent a very basic level of security. This is not the ceiling, this is the floor, this is stuff that you should be doing. This is stuff that we know how to do. Solutions exist for all these problems. They're well defined. This is not anything crazy aside from that requirement 3, which is why you don't store credit card numbers. So it's not hard, it's just reprioritization, taking a little bit of focus away from the day-to-day go, 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 and saying, okay, let's make sure we're secure, let's make sure we're going down a good path. From a really broad ecosystem type spectrum, if PCI is not enforced, then breaches become more common. If breaches become more common, brands and acquirers have to spend more money cleaning up the breaches. If brands and acquirers spend more money cleaning up the breaches, they're going to want to kick that back to make up for that lost revenue. You're going to see higher interest rates on your credit card, and you're going to see higher transaction fees for merchants. Also, if PCI DSS is not enforced, the government's going to get involved. And that's going to look a whole lot worse than this. Okay? So, Ryan, I think I'll turn it over to you at this point.
So, what Joel put together is a great overview for a lot of different requirements. What I'm going to do is kind of jump into, we'll scroll through here, is more in detail of requirement 6.5. So 6.5 is where Joel talked about, you know, the details of, you kind of glossed by that slide of some of the details of what specific things need to be accounted for from a development perspective. And while it does encompass development details and things that should be looked for during the development process, there's also in 6.5, in requirement 6.5 and sub requirements, discussion about training, right? So you wouldn't necessarily have some dude off the street just repair your car if they came up to you and said that they could. No, you're going to go to a somewhat reputable shop. You have a good feeling that they're capable of doing so. Why would we ask someone who is not trained or unaware to do development to accomplish these requirements? We've got to train our people. So I always try to take the people, process, technology triad in trying to solve different problems like this. And so we'll talk about a little bit of training. The other side of requirement 6.5 is the details. So what I've done here today is I'm not going to regurgitate all of the details of those requirements, but point you in a direction and point you to OWASP resources that can help you with some of the mechanics of solving those problems, right? The documentation out there is going to be much more effective than I could be in the 10, 15 minutes here. So there'll be links in the slide deck that you all will have access to after the presentation. And then finally, you know, there's this last piece of so process and then technology. Technology is key in enablement. So we've got developers out there that are doing their day-to-day tasks, and they're working in an IDE or working in whatever. I'm not going to get into the religious war about which IDE is best, but there's plenty of tools out there that integrate into the development environment, and we need to ingrain those into developers' day-to-day operations to make this part of their day and not feel like it's just slammed onto them. And that's how you're going to get a better adoption rate. As you all know, I work for Mutual of Omaha. There's plenty of things that we struggle with, and we have about 700 people in IS, and I would say a good 50% of that is development staff, and across multiple teams ranging from new technologies to we're a 100-year-old company, 50, 60 years some of the stuff has been running. So it's a long time, and it's tough to move people from a mindset that they need to do some of this stuff. So I'm not going to say that we're great at doing all of these things, So what we're doing at Mutual is trying to scope this thing. Joel talked about squeezing the card data, that environment, that in-scope environment, as tight as possible, or just get rid of it if you can. And we're working like heck to do so. So what we're trying to do is develop tightly scoped systems that we have to apply some of these requirements to, and then restricting or enhancing our processes around that scope. So. By the way, stop me at any point in time if someone has questions or additional comments. I'd like to get your feedback on what's worked for you guys at the end here or throughout the presentation too. What's worked for you to solve some of these problems and what you've struggled with so that we can avoid them. I think the things that we do incorrectly and fail at are some of the most valuable things. So what you'll notice is I swapped this a little bit. So we first started out with people, process, and technology, and I swapped that. I put process ahead of the people. And I felt that that was important because we have to define what our targets are before we really start moving towards the targets. A lot of people underestimate the value of standards and policy, but it does set expectations of what you're trying to achieve. And at least if you start there, you can build processes that back that, and the rest of it just rolls up to that point. Don't forget to, again, if you've got deviations, and if you're not going to apply something to your entire environment, we're surely not going to. But scope, make sure you define in your standards and policies of what you have in scope and what it does apply to. Don't forget that. The other thing is clearly define who's doing what and when. So who's doing the development? Is there specific teams doing development? Who's doing the code reviews on that development or on that developed product? Who's doing the sign-offs at the very end? Who's doing the change management? Who's responsible for those parts and pieces? You've got to lay that out. And don't forget to review it regularly. So the very first thing, and I've got it at the bottom of this slide, is the very first thing that an auditor is going to come in and say is, what are your practices? And if you don't have that written down, you're going to be in trouble, because then the automatic mindset is well, they're just flying by the seat of their pants. And so don't underestimate the value of policy and standards. And some people don't work in as big of a shop, so if you're doing a lot of these things, just give yourself credit for them. That's all the standard talks about, is give yourself credit for the things that you're doing. Document your processes, because that's the first thing that's going to be asked for. So now I'll jump back to people. So we've defined what our expectations are. We've defined the roles that we need within to achieve those expectations. Let's talk about how do we achieve those. We've got to make sure people are educated and provide training to them if they're not already coming in the door with that level of knowledge. What we're going to do is we're going to take a multi-tiered approach to training. So we know that someone that's participating in the software development lifecycle as a whole everyone's playing a different role in there. So, but everyone needs to be aware of what the expectations are, and at least understand what the risks of a certain requirement are. And this is where I kind of step out of PCI for a second, is we have critical requirements in all of the development projects that we're working on. So an application is supposed to do X, Y, and Z. Well, if those are critical requirements, then we have to have people who are capable of fulfilling those. And if you're going to use a Java backend for your web application, then you want Java developers who are knowledgeable. You're not going to hire somebody off the street. Unless you train them to the point where they understand what they're doing. Security, as you're integrating into the software development lifecycle, and I think that's key, is it's not something that sets aside. It needs to be integrated into the entire lifecycle, from requirements to design to development to testing to deployment. Make sure that whoever's participating in that is got a good high-level understanding at the very least. That's where I talk about the high level. Keep it short, keep it sweet. Make sure it drives home key points. That's something that can be delivered to everyone. even the PMs and business analysts who are ultimately paying for you to do this. That's kind of the way it boils down in our organization is we're not doing things because IT wants to do these things. It's because we have a business need to provide this service to our customers. They're asking for it. What they need to know is, well, security is no longer a second-class requirement. It's not something you just kind of bolt on at the end. You need to know the value of it so that when it comes to the end and we're compromising on requirements, security isn't one of those things that we were compromising on. We need to treat them as critical requirements. And then what we're going to do is we're really taking that foundation level of knowledge and providing an advanced level of that. So this is where it gets a little bit more technical, well, a lot more technical if you want to talk about code and someone who's capable of conducting a security code review. That's different than a normal code review to make sure things are just functioning. Lots of nuance around security topics that need to be considered. You need someone who's knowledgeable, and I believe the standard even says has to be knowledgeable about these things, right? You can't just have anybody doing a code review. They've got to be qualified to do so. Joel, go ahead.
To that point, each of the requirements has testing procedures. The requirement 6.5 testing procedure to interview developers, make sure they're knowledgeable about what they say they're knowledgeable. Sorry.
No, that's a great point. So again, in that audit is if you're attesting that you're compliant, you're going to be audited eventually. And one of the things that you can count on is them pulling in not the people who wrote the policies and the standards to describe their level of understanding of the technical requirements. They're going to pull in the people who are hands on keyboard doing the development and say, what do you know about X, Y, and Z? And they're going to say, I don't know anything. Well, they better not have that answer. This is what this is guarding against, right? They better say that, hey, I understand, and this is how we mitigate some of those things within our development process. So multi-tiered. The advanced is really going to go to what we sort of consider our on-team security experts, if you will. There's only a certain couple places where those people need to be a bottleneck in the process. Code review is one of them. They've got to have that. But we need to build a set of knowledge that we're capable of doing those types of things. And again, don't forget your project managers and your business analysts who are ultimately saying what goes to production and what doesn't go to production. They need to understand the value of these things. All right, so the next thing is our technology aspect. So I talked about IDEs and you know, again, I'm surely not going to get into that discussion of which IDE is best, but there's tons of tools ranging from very low cost, i.e. free, other than the cost of incorporating them into your process, to the high-end IBM app scan, like serious enterprise grade stuff. All of them are good, let's start there, in the sense that it's good to have something if you don't have anything. Depending on what your product or your sophistication level is and what you're developing, you may want to invest in something more specific. I think a lot of that has to do with culture of your organization, though, right? So if you've got a high governance type of organization, a lot of red tape, if you will, some of the more sophisticated products, such as the IBM AppScan, I'm not endorsing that, I just use it as an example, offer a lot more integration to processes, checkpoints, workflow, etc. But the point of that is to get it in front of the developer. As soon as they typed in something that's not going to be good from a security standpoint, put it in front of them. Put it in front of them with a suggestion on how to fix it, or information on how they can resolve the situation. The sooner that you can get something in front of them, the better off you're going to be, and it's just cheaper to do it in that stage of the development lifecycle. Another thing you can do, ban, this is going into maybe coding standards and things like that, but ban deprecated APIs. I'm past history is Java development. And so the IDEs that are out there, there's tons of, it was great Eclipse-based stuff. I mean, you see when you're using a deprecated API, well, it's easy to guard against that in a code review. You should be looking at it in that context. Just, you can't use that. Or, you know, known bad things that there's plenty of functions out there that easily allow buffer overflow. Why not scan your code base for that when you're writing it and just eliminate that from the picture, right? Or guard against it in how many ever ways. So, you know, ban the use of those deprecated APIs. The other thing that kind of goes to some of the stuff that Joel was talking about is, you know, make it easy on yourself. We all build on other products. So third-party libraries is a big deal. Anybody familiar with Heartbleed? Okay, so classic example of a highly used third-party library provided. It's got great functionality. Everybody pulled it in and started using it. Well, now it's outdated. That one you probably pulled in 6 months ago. Guess what? You need to replace that. Make your life easier by automating in some form or fashion the upgrade of your dependent libraries. Go ahead.
It's only a good idea if it's done right.
Agreed.
A big part of the driver for the whole Heartbleed fiasco was there's only a handful of developers that were working on OpenSSL with any regularity. That's more common than you would think for a lot of those open source libraries. And if you're automating pulling down the latest version without actually checking out the code to make sure that it's secure, what you're doing is pulling in any new bug that they've introduced.
Yep.
Better plan would be, after you've checked it out as a company, as a person, as a something, then push it out to the development team. But don't just automatically pull in code from outside and integrate it into it.
Yeah, I think you made a good point. What I glossed over here, what I don't want to devalue is the quality control that you're describing, right? So there's open source does not necessarily guarantee, and we all know this, does not guarantee that it's secure. It doesn't mean that.
Like
so you
Red Hat
and
SUSE,
exactly.
Red Hat and SUSE, I mean, they tend to both backport from new versions, the bug fixes going back, but then they got caught also on RPD, even though they have that process. Right, still got caught.
Yes, you still need to have a quality control checkpoint in here, but automate as much as you can to make your lives easier.
The only way you probably should caught that is if you were in Fortify on the source version.
Yeah, I doubt it. So I don't want to get too deep into that conversation, but my main agree. There's lots of things that were around that situation, including a lot of media maybe overhype. I'll state that too. But the point of my statement here is you want to create as the least amount of friction to your processes as possible. You're still going to do, whether it's automated or whether you're doing it by hand, you're still doing a quality control. And if you can put that library, once it's vetted, into every developer you have on your team's repository, and it automatically gets pulled in, we're leveraging some tools to do so, ID for package management, things like that, that allow you to do some of those things. Just try to integrate those things as much as possible into your day-to-day operations, and it's going to make your life much easier in the long term. That doesn't mean you shouldn't test those things. Scott.
I'm sorry to
No.
do this, but if you pick up to finish, you got some good slides at the end there. Love to see them.
Yeah.
We're going to lose the room.
Okay, yeah.
So, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. So don't forget the testing aspect. This slide here is just a reference of all those 6.5 requirements and how I threw this together pretty quickly of OWASP resources that can help you through the process. Again, I'm not going to talk too much in detail about those.
Are those mappings your suggestions, or are they provided by PCI?
They are not provided by PCI. Now, PCI does talk about the OWASP Top 10 specifically, along with some other things. This was something I threw together last night, just to map these things together. Again, a lot of those, like Joel mentioned, are specifically mapped one-to-one from PCI requirement to OWASP Top 10. The last thing is so treat them as critical requirements, and then you need to account for testing, right? Test both positively and negatively. I think the last one is we know what it's supposed to do. Let's also make sure we know what we test what it's not supposed to do, i.e., can I log in with ABC123? No, you shouldn't be able to do that. So don't forget those negative test cases. I think that's so overlooked in your testing, in general testing. It really needs to be called out. And so you got to put yourself in a mindset, builder, breaker, defender. Get yourself in that breaker mindset and write some test cases that are going to get us to a point where you can script that stuff out and test on a regular basis. And then last thing I want to touch on is something that we're going to be deploying is this application security verification standard. So this is what we're going to be measuring to, and this is just some examples of that, and I just took screenshots here, so there's tons of information in here. But this is a good way to start building your test cases. How do you validate that your security is functioning correctly? Use these as a guideline to write to get into that breaker mindset. Am I accounting for A, B, and C in my test cases? This is a good resource for that. And also, if you've got a compliance team, like I sit on, you know, that's what we're going to deliver to developer teams, and you're going to be measured against this. So you're giving them the test. And if they build to the test, then great. And it's clear of where they're going to fail. All right, I know we're pretty much out of time here, but maybe if we need to, we can go out in the hall. But what's worked well for you guys, what hasn't, think about that stuff, and don't hesitate to share with each other. I know that I don't get out enough. And it's, you know, everybody's slugging through their day, and I know that the community as a whole has a lot of value here. So don't hesitate to share with each other what hasn't worked well. So, sorry,
you're
right
right
up to the edge here. So.
Respectful of everybody's time and everything. So there you have it. The slides are already posted. If you go up to the OWASP wiki page, you can download them. They're a link under today's events. And let's see here, the prize. John 9. Oh. John.res.
That's me.
There you go. I didn't take all that for you.
Thank you.
There you go. And
So we're going to make it more interesting than we all put our credit cards in there. And just
that would be great. That would be interesting. So, all right. So, yeah, we have a few minutes, I guess, if you guys want to do any questions for these guys. Any? Yeah, sure. And speak up if you would, so it picks up.
Yeah. So in your application security testing, how often do you combine the results from dynamic analysis and static?
So what we're doing is this mic on?
No.
Do I need to come up? So what we're trying to do, and again, we don't do all this stuff all that well. Again, shrink the environment. So we're looking at tools right now to do some of that stuff. So we're sort of a decentralized environment. So adapt this, but we offload a lot of the responsibilities to the development teams. So the static code analysis, I would expect to go into their build processes. I would expect to go into their integration processes. The dynamic, it's a little bit more sophisticated, maybe later on in their integration cycles. But we also leverage Qualys. If you're not familiar with Qualys, it provides a web application scanning tool that you literally provide credentials, and it will log into a site and start crawling around and attempting all sorts of exploits. That generally happens pretty late in the development cycle. Hopefully all the big problems are solved, and it's just, oh, I missed this page or something like that. I don't have a great answer for you. How we integrated those together, we don't have a ton of experience doing it yet.
And that's it. It's a huge problem because, you know, even when you have your dynamic testing analysis, you don't know where the problem is really. Static analysis.
Right. They
Translate
absolutely.
that into, okay, where do I fix one?
Yeah, they absolutely. They complement each other, but they don't always overlap, for sure. Good question.
Okay, any other good questions? All right, well, you talked about assessments. The last couple of meetings that we had, or the last meeting that we had, and then John and I went down to the Nebraska CyberSecurity Conference and presented a little bit last week. We've got a slide deck and video of John talking about third-party vendor assessments and things to consider when you're looking at third parties, and basically some sample documentation for, here is a sample document that you provide your vendor. We will ask you these questions. So out again on the website of the wiki, if you guys are interested in that. That was a really useful talk, and that's out there, slides. And the sample documents that he have, he cleansed them, so it shouldn't say where he's from, but you know, if you find it, just delete that real quick. So with that, we're done. Thank you very much for your time. Grab some pizza or pop on the way out, and we'll see you next quarter. Oh, no, we're not done. You guys. If you don't mind. Oh, yeah. Thanks. If you want to earn CVE, or if there's ever an audit for CVE, make sure you sign in on our CISO front. Otherwise,